2024, and welcome to PCCEP's first meeting of 2024. This is a public meeting of the PCCEP Settlement and Policy Subcommittee. Let's get started with introductions, and I'll hand it over to Pastor Weisner to get us started.
Again, hello to everyone. I'm Pastor Weisner. I am the chair of the Settlement and Policy, but also co-chair of the full committee. Welcome, and I'll pass it to Byron.
Pastor Weisner, this is Byron, PCCEP member and Policy Settlement and Policy Subcommittee member, and I'll pass it to who? Ashley? Yeah, Ashley.
I think I heard my name. Okay. I'm sorry. Ashley Schofield, usually her pronouns. Also co-chair of the community engagement subcommittee. And sorry, I was making dinner, so thank you for your patience. See. I can't see any other PCCEP members.
Yeah,
Leslie.
Carrie here.
Oh. Yeah, I see Leslie's name if you want to.
Or let's pass it to Carrie, because I think Carrie's ready.
Okay, hi. My name is Carrie and I'm a PCCEP member. Can I pass it to Leslie or is there someone else? I'll pass it to Leslie.
Hello, can folks hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm having technical issues tonight, so I'm actually going to be off camera, but yeah, I'm Leslie Martinez, a PCCEP member of the policy subcommittee as well as community engagement, and my pronouns are she, hers.
Awesome. Good to see you guys. And any other PCCEP members here?
We have Kim.
I think I'm left. Kip Silverman, he, him pronouns, PCCEP member, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Awesome. All right. And let's move into city introductions, PPB, DOJ, any other folks who want to introduce themselves tonight. And I'll start. I'm Dory Grabinski, PCCEP project manager, and anyone else just jump in.
I'll jump in. Stephanie Howard, Mayor's Director of Community Safety. I can pass it to Sarah.
Hi, Sarah Ames, she, her pronouns, Deputy City Attorney. And how about Amanda, since you're next to me on my box?
Amanda McMillan, Portland Police Bureau. I am the commander of the Professional Standards Division. And I saw Kim, you're on here.
I'm Kim Hubbard with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm the sergeant of the Homicide Division.
And I'm Mary Claire Buckley, and I'm the Inspector General at the Police Bureau and do DOJ compliance.
I'm Brian Davidson. I'm a Deputy District Attorney at the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hager. Oh,
go for it, Jared.
Sorry, Samir. Jared Hager, U.S. Department of Justice.
Hi, Samir Canal, Community Safety Division of the City of Portland. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa, and I am one of the facilitators.
And I see that Tia joined us, another PCCEP member. Tia, are you with us now? She might need a few more minutes. Okay. I think we've got everyone and can move on. So slide. Any PCCEP members want to read our community agreements?
Listen actively, respectfully, share airtime, be present and open to new information and perspectives. Assume positive intent, respect each other, respect the group, speak your own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully. Ask questions to clarify, call out bias, and be okay with ambiguity.
Thanks, Byron. And quick overview of today's meeting, and then we'll get right into it. We're going to start with some updates. And I'll just save that for the update section. And then we're going to spend the second half of the meeting kind of the chairs of this subcommittee and the full committee have been thinking about this meeting as sort of a soft launch, thinking about the directive review process and how PCCEP wants to begin engaging with that more and thinking about what they feel like they need in order to do that successfully. So we're going to kind of just start learning more about that and discussing as a group what PCCEP wants that to look like on the PCCEP end. Yeah. So let's get right into it. Next slide. And I think we're handing this over to Pastor Wisner on the next slide.
Excellent. And again, to thank you, Dory. This is word of acknowledgement. We've all heard about here our most recent fatal officer involved shooting at Mall 205. I would like to first start off, if I may, and want to describe my set of tone and my point of view first. As a leader, my words are never to hurt or to make anyone feel like I have more understanding than anyone. It's to uplift and to inspire. And as a PCCEP leader, I am reminded that my voice and sitting here is the voice of the voiceless at this table. Secondly, I sadly like to say to all those that are in attendance to remember the sanctity of life. In areas that I have been a part of, a lot of the law, use of force, loss of life, I've always been reminded that my comments may reflect the way that as a person who is looking at it, and not to forget the loss of a family member. My example of that is when I had to preach Kendra James' funeral, remembering how the words that I use, but also keeping in my mind that they were lost of a daughter, a sister, a mother, and she was much more to many people as a friend as well. And as someone who is very close to what it means in the sanctity of life to lose someone that has been taken by someone else, and that's the loss of my son. I'm always in remembrance of the pain that most people are experiencing. And the last conversation I've heard is, I am a mother, no matter how my child was lost. That's my child. The same, I would like to share and give thanks to those who helped the Acosta family, Wilma Acosta, who has just recently was found as a young woman that came to the city of Portland, and body was found in the Willamette River. We worked very closely with her mother and the family. Those who have come and galvanized and showing our love, just the same as I'm saying here in the sanctity of life in our city, we all have been affected and all come to help support and comfort as much as we possibly can. Well, Wilma's mother sent a text on her way home after the Latino network community galvanized together and helped with the cremation of Wilma and helping the family when they left with their daughter. Her reflection sent a text that says, "Thank you, Robin," she called me. We're on the highway of 205 heading back home with our daughter Wilma's ashes. And thank you, Pastor, for all the comfort. And then connecting who we had, which was Martha Wimbus, who let us stay at her house for 4 nights. She did not want us to worry about a place. And we're so in the time of our great despair. And we want to thank the city of Portland, those who have supported. We had it's not like a GoFundMe, but it was a support. We had the chiefs who helped with their lodging, Chief Bob Day and Chief Frome supported donations, as well as other community members, Pastor Hennessy's and others, to let them know that we all care. And that's how we as a city respond to everything when it comes to the sanctity of life. And that is just my opening statement on that. Next slide. Officer involved shooting, the process we will talk, hopefully understand is how it, until the facts are gathered, we're looking here. And my hope is, as PCCEP, to be able to take what we have as where we are today and to be able to gather the facts and be able to be a dialogue and make the recommendation for improvement in areas of where it is, of what this group has come and being heard through, whether it's kicking it over to our community engagement or community. Hopefully we'll be able to do this. In my mind, I'm hoping and putting it out here to the group that we'll be able to have comments where the city or the community can come into our community engagement and have dialogue, but also be able to look at those after the facts and gather how do we improve or how do we make recommendations from what we've gathered from the community. How will this shooting be investigated? What is the process to determine whether criminal charges are filed? We have tonight, as we have before, engaged in areas of having the opportunity to have the leadership and the Portland Police to come and help us understand the process through this. And then from there, we can move on. We have Commander Amanda McMillan, the professional standard of the internal affairs. And I think she's going to be our invited guest at this point. I would love to give it over to her if that's the next screen.
Yeah, I think the general questions for Commander McMillan were on that last slide, was my understanding. So we can go back there, or even we can probably close the slide and then just hand it over to Commander McMillan at this time.
I want to make sure that question, how it's investigated internally, that I'm getting to the heart of what folks actually want to know, as opposed to a long droning recitation of our administrative investigation process. So I wasn't sure if there was something under that question. Did somebody have something specific that they were wondering or needed to know, or does this group want to hear about sort of the internal affairs side of things, and how we respond and investigate these cases administratively, not to be confused with the criminal investigation, which is something else entirely.
Yes, Commander, that has the area of what we were hoping to bring is the process. We had Tina Jones last time, who came in and walked us through some of those processes and was able to kind of give us an understanding for those who may not know how that process actually works through the criminal side, as well as just the behavior. Dora, you had something?
Well, yeah, I think maybe that's the question just posed is a really good one, I think, to open up to our PCCEP members here, as far as, are there specific questions that you all have? Or would you prefer kind of that overview of the administrative side of how this process works? What are you thinking?
again, my thoughts were, and it's open, thank Dory for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think
in.
maybe, and I should have said, and raise your hand if you have a thought, and we can kind of figure that out.
For those who may not know the process, that's how I was thinking, I'm a process type person.
Carrie, did you have something?
I was just gonna say, if it's not repetitive, a quick summary of the process would be good for those who haven't heard it before. And then I know the body cameras are of interest to us. And so, specifically addressing that part of it might be relevant to our conversation about the directives.
So broad strokes, internal investigation, we get notified, we being Internal Affairs, Professional Standards Division. Internal Affairs is under Professional Standards Division, but Internal Affairs gets notified when an officer involved shooting or deadly use of force or an in custody death, when these things happen. We're notified in cases of officer involved shooting. We'll send a command staff member and a sergeant from Internal Affairs out to the scene to coordinate on scene, gather information, because we interview involved members within 48 hours. So the event happens, and then within 48 hours, anybody involved in the application of deadly force will be interviewed by our investigators in Internal Affairs. We have professional staff, non-sworn investigators who conduct the actual investigations. They're overseen by sergeants, supervised by sworn sergeants. So after the sergeant and the command staff member respond to the scene, they gather information on scene, they prepare that information, they give the notices of interview to the involved members. And then those investigators start immediately to prepare for those interviews that are going to happen, like I said, within 48 hours. The investigation proceeds. What homicide does, or whatever investigating agency, because sometimes these occur inside the city of Portland, sometimes not. And that determines who's going to do the investigation into the homicide itself. And we have some folks here that can speak to that, how the criminal side of it works a bit. But after we gather all of our information and conduct those initial interviews, we're also going to be looking to do witness officer interviews, gather any other information, certainly if there was body worn camera or location camera information. We also get whatever criminal case file there is, we'll have that as part of our ultimate investigation. And these investigations run sort of parallel. They're going along, they're both going, right? So you've got the criminal side of things and you've got the internal administrative side of things that go along. And once our investigation is done, we have an involved review process that makes through many different layers, which I can of course go into if people are curious about it. But at this point, a couple weeks into an event, we're still investigating, and that involves a lot of interviews. It involves, without speaking specifically to this case, we're going to interview, all the officers that are on scene, and detectives. I know we have Detective Sergeant Hubbard here. She can chat a little bit about how homicide responds and what they do on scene and how they handle these cases when they're internal to Portland. So that's sort of the initial, and these go every which way depending on what the event, where it's at and who is present and what kind of, what video is available, what the audio on the calls, the call is gathered, all of that stuff you would think of as related to the investigation is gathered for purposes of the administrative investigation. Questions about that? I don't want to overly anything.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay.
I think Carrie asked a question about maybe body worn cameras. Carrie, was there a specific question you had about that?
No, I just wanted to make sure that, not related to the recent case at 205, but in general, where the body camera stuff was reviewed in the process. That was what I was asking to highlight.
If we had body worn camera and an officer involved shooting, it would be gathered and it would be looked at on both sides of the house, both the criminal side and the internal side. We would review all of that stuff and have a process by which we will do that. We haven't had to jump that hurdle yet, but that exists because the body worn camera program has had that limited run of it, but it hasn't been rolled out bureau-wide yet. They're getting that up and going still. So.
Oh, okay. So we have questions. Odelia, go ahead.
Hi, I was wondering if there's any information you can share on the current investigations, or an update or anything like that.
I don't have anything additional to share. These investigations, particularly the internals, are for a myriad of reasons held very tightly. We have labor law, we have contracts, we have things that we are bound by, and then certainly investigative integrity. If we're on the criminal side, if they're investigating aspects of it, they don't release the details of those investigations until they have gathered enough information. So I don't have anything to share as it pertains to this investigation specifically. There have been a couple of press releases. Maybe Sergeant Hubbard can, the details of those cases that can be released have been released in the public releases that have been put out.
Okay, we have another question from Leslie Martinez. Go ahead, Leslie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so my sound is still having issues. Yeah, so I think you touched on it towards the end of what you said there, but kind of bouncing off of Odelia's question, at what point do those details get released to the public, and how much detail does the public get at the end of these investigations? I'm not sure if you want to go through the rest of the process, but that's my general question.
Thanks, Leslie. Stephanie, did you have a question or did you want to respond to that?
I was going to just maybe make a suggestion that it might be good this might be a good place to transition to our DA representative to talk about the next steps in the grand jury process, to get ultimately to, Leslie's question about when ultimately information can be released.
Okay. Dory, is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
If I could, hi, thank you very much, Stephanie. If I could make a suggestion, just as far as being linear, perhaps Sergeant Hubbard might go next, and because the next part of the process would be the investigative part, which the Bureau handles, and then maybe it would make sense at that point for me to transition to what would happen after that, which would be the portion that the DA's office is involved in, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, that works. Definitely. I see Dory shaking her
so
head.
If I can sort of, because I often learn alongside our PCCEP members. So we have the internal investigation side, which is Commander McMillan, that's internal affairs, that's the administrative discipline, right? Then it sounds like Sergeant Hubbard deals with the homicide investigations, which is more criminal investigation, right? And then sort of the third step, so to speak, would be the DA side of things, which is, I'm not sure your title, Mr. Davidson. So that's kind of the sort of the linear progression that I think you just referenced there, just for PCCEP members who are kind of learning this as we go. So yeah, Sergeant Hubbard, if you want to pick up.
Certainly. So we work by ORS, the DA is the lead in the investigations in any use of deadly force, in custody death, and homicides in the state. So we work as their conduit and show up and complete the criminal side of the investigation. We treat these in very much the same manner as we do any homicide that we approach, with the thorough look at everything that's involved. You know, we'll review body cameras and video and talk to witness members, as well as any civilian witnesses that are present or available. Once my detectives working with the DA have completed their investigation, they present it to the DA's office, and at that point, the DA prepares it for grand jury typically. Any specific questions to the investigation itself?
I think just one point of clarification for everybody. So, and how do we define the line? So, you know, Sergeant Hubbard, her crew in homicide, they're detectives. She's a sergeant over a group of detectives, and they're concerned with those ORS, as she said, the Oregon Revised Statutes, so law, so violations of law. And internal affairs, you know, the line for us is we're concerned with, did you violate policy? So the policies and rules of the police bureau. So, and both things, and you can not violate the law, but violate policy. So that's sort of the line, and that's why we have two, right? So the district attorney is not going to hold our officers accountable to our policies, and I'm not going to hold them directly accountable for the law. Although we do have a policy that says if you violate the law, you're violating a policy. So it's kind of a catch-22 there for folks. But I just wanted to delineate. That's how you're deciding which side of sort of which investigation you're dealing with. Are we talking about the law, or are we talking about policy?
And I'll just jump in to add one additional point to that. If we're talking about a law violation, we're talking about the criminal justice system. In Amanda's world, we're talking about what employee discipline looks like if someone has violated a policy.
All right. I see Byron. Go ahead, Byron.
And this is for a question for PPB. Policy and law. If there's a gray area in that, how do you determine which way to lean? If policy and law are kind of mixed up, if you have a gray area, how do you figure, okay, which one was law, which one was, if that makes sense?
So we run both these investigations always, no matter what. So if there's an officer involved shooting, both of these things are going to happen. There's going to be the administrative investigation and review side of things where we're looking at it through the policy lens. And then there's going to be the criminal side of the investigation, because, you know, it's a homicide. It's an attempt homicide, whether the person is deceased or not. And so you're going to get both. So we don't have to decide one or the other. We do both, and they're both going from the moment, you know, that happens, or even before. I mean, we take into account information that came before, you know, if it was a protracted call before the shooting happened, for example, or if there were other calls that were related, or we're going to take all that into account on both sides of the investigation, the internal policy and the law side of things. So we don't have to pick, we do both.
And I think it's important to note that when it comes to a potential law violation, the police bureau is not making that determination. We complete the homicide division completes the thorough investigation, and we present those details to the district attorneys, and they are making those determinations, and they present them to a grand jury. And DDA Davidson can speak to kind of the grand jury process, but then it's ultimately, you know, citizens that are reviewing the facts and the details and making that determination.
Not to be funny or anything, because this is a very, very serious matter. It doesn't seem like through all the hearings of police shootings, none of the officers have been reprimanded or, you know, in a sense, took an account for what has been done. And please, I'm being very serious, and I'm not trying to be funny about this. It's kind of more of statement question, I guess. So I don't know if it's kind of hard to tell sometimes if from a citizen standard or a citizen standpoint who's seeing not being in the PPB arena.
Maybe this might help also, is that during, I believe it either was Kendra James or Jahar Perez, he was disciplined under policy, finding out that he had violated policy, where that he was not violated under the criminal. So there is hopefully gathering more information, understanding what has happened, even with some of the prior shootings, how that the Bureau came with where they were in doing this process of what we're talking now.
Thank you, Pastor Weisner. Before we go to public questions, do we have any other members who have a specific question?
And so I want to make sure we now hear from DDA Davidson. Thank you for I heard a mention of your title, so now I know. So to kind of close the loop on that criminal process, the grand jury process. So let's turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Tori.
Thanks so much to everybody, and thanks for having me. Yeah, and what you've heard so far is absolutely accurate. What Sergeant Hubbard said is, you know, I responded or do respond to the scene whenever one of these occurs, or one of my coworkers do. We are involved in the investigation, cooperating and coordinating with detectives with Portland Police Bureau while the investigation's ongoing. When the Bureau has completed the investigation, it's generally referred to us. When I say referred, the totality of the case file is sent to the District Attorney's Office to include all the reports, audio of witness interviews, transcripts of interviews, scene photographs, whatever surveillance video might exist, if any. So we receive all that. Additionally, there might be evidence that's been sent to other organizations like the Oregon State Police Crime Laboratory or other organizations. There might be forensic analysis going on of firearm evidence or other types of evidence, blood toxicology, and autopsy reports that we are waiting for from medical examiners' offices. So when all those, what seems like, you know, all the relevant information, investigation reports are concluded, they're sent to us. You know, we review them all, and they're often voluminous, as you can imagine. And then what is typically done is, as Sergeant Hubbard suggested, is that a grand jury is convened. And for those of you not familiar with the grand jury process, basically, as a deputy district attorney, I do not inherently have the authority to charge any felony level crimes. So for any potential felony level crime that's been committed, the grand jury has to review the evidence and then return what we call a true bill, or it's basically the grand jury saying either we do believe that there is sufficient evidence to charge someone with felony, or we don't. That's either called a true bill or a not true bill. And the grand jury, as has been alluded to, is it's a panel of 7 folks who they're not lawyers, generally speaking, or judges. They're just, if anybody's done jury duty before or ever received a jury summons, that is the pool of people that that the courts, actually, it's not us, the courts select kind of randomly a certain number of people to sit for a period of 4 weeks, and not just in homicide cases, but in any felony case. They sit and listen to the evidence in a particular case. They are provided with the applicable law, and then ultimately the citizen members of the grand jury make decisions about whether cases are charged or not. So in this particular scenario of an officer use of deadly force, we would convene the grand jury, and I would begin to call all the relevant witnesses to testify under oath before the grand jury to say what it is they know about what happened. And that would include the lead detectives in the case from the Bureau, witness officers, any civilian witnesses who have anything relevant to add. And typically, also the involved officers will testify. And at the conclusion, well, at the beginning and at the conclusion, I present the relevant evidence, or sorry, the relevant statutes related to different potential crimes, also relevant statutes related to use of deadly force and other potential defenses that might be available, the laws relating to self-defense or defense of others. And then the jurors, the grand jurors, are charged with making a decision about whether there is sufficient evidence to issue criminal charges or not. And that's fully their authority and decision-making power. And then if it does not result in the indictment of an involved officer, then typically a transcript is requested and prepared of testimony, because these grand jury proceedings, not just the officer use of force ones, but any felony grand jury proceeding is recorded, it's audio recorded, and then the statutes authorize, if requested, a transcript of the testimony to be released. And that has been the typical process. And I'm happy to answer any kind of additional questions about that.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Mr. Davidson, can you say a few words about the protections around grand jury proceedings, the need for confidentiality, and a little bit about what the importance of that is, not just from the state law perspective, but for the investigative perspective?
Well, as far as confidentiality in the investigation itself, this is the only reason the state's involved with the DA's office is because it's a criminal investigation, right? And that doesn't mean that anybody's been prejudged, but this is technically a homicide because it's the intentional killing of one person by another. Now, whether that's a criminal homicide or not is what we're looking to determine. But as far as, releasing information, prior to the grand jury's deliberations in a kind of public sense, that's generally very unusual. So the investigation and an officer involved use of deadly force is treated like kind of any other investigation, and the information's kept close because, we want to make sure when we're hearing things from witnesses about what they observed or what they have heard that or seen, that we're getting it from their actual observations rather than just maybe information that escaped from the investigation, and we're just kind of hearing it kind of circling back. So as far as that's concerned, that's kind of how it's approached, just to preserve the integrity of the information that we're gathering. And in the grand jury itself, it's actually changed quite a bit over the years. When I first started doing this many years ago, the grand jury proceedings were very much cloistered and secret. That was kind of one of the hallmarks of grand jury. It's become very much different depending on the results. If it results in an indictment, there was recent changes in the law that the recordings are provided to the indicted individual's legal representation, their defense team, and specifically only relating to officer use of deadly force investigations. If there's a not true bill related to it, if the statutes, as I said before, do allow disclosure of the testimony, the recorded testimony in the form of the transcript.
Thank you for that. There is another general question that perhaps can be answered. What is the timeline of the investigations that happen initially on the criminal side and on the administrative side? And then once it gets to the DA's office, what does that process look like? Not process, but what's that timeline look like? And maybe perhaps it's giving the public an understanding of how long this whole process takes.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. It can really vary, and it can really just on a number of factors. The investigation can take a variety of amounts of time depending on, for example, the milieu in which it occurs, the number of witnesses involved. Generally, we try to do them. What's the most important thing is that it's done correctly, right? So that's our primary value. And if that means it takes longer, then that's what it means. But we try to do them quickly. I think typically, it's hard to say, but it can be a month, 2 months before the investigation reaches its conclusion and is referred to the Multnomah County DA's office. So often we are waiting for other organizations, and I mentioned the Oregon State Police and Medical Examiner's Office, to conclude their subsequent investigations, analyzing ballistics information or analyzing blood sample analysis and other forensic type things that can take, because of the scientific process, and can take longer. So that can often delay kind of what we're doing. So we want to make sure we have that information to present as part of a complete, thorough, and professional investigation of the grand jury. But, and Sergeant Hubbard, if you have other thoughts on this, please jump in. But, it's hard. There's no hard and fast rule. But obviously, the public is, I think, owed, in my mind, as quick a resolution as a thorough and competent investigation allows, for everybody, for the involved officers, for the public, for the family of the person who's deceased. So, and that's our core value, is to render a conclusion to this as quickly as a competent, complete, thorough investigation will allow.
Thank you for that response. It looks like we have folks from the public. Dory, if you don't mind, I can go ahead and go into that, those questions. Babs, your name came up first earlier, and then we'll go to Mark.
Whoops. Hi. Thank you. Yes, I did raise my hand earlier, but it was clear there was more to be presented. So thank you to all of you who have taken quite a bit of time now explaining the process. It's appreciated. I am a 75-year-old lifelong Portland resident and have been following the transition process, the Police Accountability Commission, all very closely for the last several years now. A lot of the information that's been shared so far tonight, I have been able to pull up and see online. And again, I appreciated the more informed detail. So I want to bring it up to right here, right now, the shooting that occurred on December 27th. I looked in the chat, and Dan Handelman apparently had to leave, but he posted that the names of the two officers, I think it's two, involved in that shooting on December 27th were released today. And there was something to click on. So I clicked on it and got that site is down. So I wasn't able, and I know technology is temperamental, but if in fact the names of those two officers involved in the shooting on December 27th were released today, can you please provide that information? And then again, bringing it up to right here, right now, what will be the next steps in terms of dealing with that situation? Thank you so much. I'm sorry my question was long. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Babs. Is that a question that perhaps Sergeant Hubbard can answer, or who would like to answer that?
Specifically, I was trying to look on my phone to see if there's where the site is down. It looks like someone posted a link regarding the officer's identification.
I just checked. The site is down indeed, but there is no link in the chat.
Okay. So, I mean, as far as any further specific details related to this particular officer-involved shooting, it's currently an open investigation. And as far as, like, just kind of to echo what DDA Davidson says, in order to maintain the integrity of the investigation, those details need to not be released publicly until the conclusion of the grand jury. And there'll be, and it's a fairly quick turnaround. I'm not sure the exact timeline between when the grand jury concludes and when the transcripts and all of the stuff is posted online.
So was it incorrect then that the names of the two police officers involved in that December 27th shooting? Is it incorrect then that their names were released today?
Babs, they are available. If you someone just put in the chat the news article that reported the names. If you click on that new link, there are actually 3 officers listed there. So yeah, those were reported today. Yeah.
But I think her question was, if it was already released, was it released without the PPB releasing that information to say that the names should not be released on her question?
No, our PIO's office sent out the press release today.
Okay.
With the officers' names.
And yeah,
so that was new
was
new information released today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go next to next person, Mark Porras. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Great, thanks. Hi, I'm Mark Porras, he, him pronouns. I'm with the Portland Cop Watch. My question for Mr. Davidson regarding the grand jury transcript. I really appreciate that the district attorney's office puts those out there for the public to see. Something I would like to see, and my question is, and I'm wondering why we don't see that, is the instructions that are given to the grand jury to whether or not they're going to return a true bill. I was wondering why we don't see those with the transcripts, and if we could see those.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. The statute doesn't provide for that, and I think what our objective generally was just to abide by the directives of the statute relating to that particular aspect of the grand jury as far as the transcript release. And you know, that's an interesting idea, though, and that's one I will mention here internally to folks, because I think it would be helpful potentially for you know, to identify in general, because you know, we don't necessarily always give the same statutes in every instance. That, you know, every scenario might be different, and the justification potentially for a use of force, if there is one, might vary because there's a variety of them under the statute. So they might vary a little bit from you know, scenario to scenario and instant to instant, but that's an interesting suggestion, actually. And as I mentioned, I'll mention that because I think it might assist, I guess, folks in understanding kind of the law that applies to any particular scenario. So thank you for suggesting that.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next question from Kate Sadler. Go ahead, Kate.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I don't have a process question. So if this is the wrong venue, I apologize. I've come to a lot of these meetings and I'm able to follow along, but I just wanted to kind of make the comment or question about why police are responsible for public safety and killing people. And I think in particular, the call for an emergency around gun violence, preventing gun violence. I think PPB got additional funding to address and prevent gun violence. And so it's confusing. And I'd love for the city or whomever to address why officers are using gun violence and causing deaths when in fact we've been funding them to prevent that. And I know there's the policy or the administrative review that we'll go through as well as the legal one, but I'm just wondering in the context of this, there being a gun violence prevention emergency that was called by the police commissioner, will that be considered? And will the mayor call for an end to gun violence by police? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Who would like to answer that question?
I'm happy to do my best on that. Thanks for the question. I think, you know, gun violence, I don't know that there is a distinction, you know, in a community sense on gun violence, whether it's perpetrated between community members or by, you know, a police officer and a community member. I think that the mechanisms for addressing this in particular are formalized in the processes that you've heard here. They're also, solidified in training, in the DOJ settlement agreement. There are all of these pieces that are being, addressed through those means. So the gun violence emergency declaration focuses more on how we deploy resources in the community for community violence between community members. But I take your point, and I think just to acknowledge that and to say that we're everyone, I think certainly in the mayor's office, and I think at PBB as well, takes these incidents incredibly seriously and would like to never have to see another one. So everything that's going into that, the many efforts that go into how police are trained and what accountability mechanisms go into addressing it when it does happen. There are a lot of venues for that. I don't know that the emergency declaration is one of them.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we have time for one last question, and we'll go to Dr. Rochelle Silver, and then we'll transition into our next agenda topic. Go ahead, Dr. Rochelle Silver.
Thank you. I was wondering what kind of data is kept on the grand jury in terms of how often indictments happen, what kind of quality assurance, when do you make changes based on things that are working or not working, and is all of that information available to the public or not?
Thank you for your question. It's an interesting question. So the grand jury is, technically speaking, if I understand this correctly, it's actually an arm of the courts. So when and basically are supervised by the courts, although the district attorney's office kind of handles their day-to-day operations. And so like when they're first selected, they're selected and oriented by the chief judge of the Multnomah County Circuit, typically, and panels. If you're talking, are you talking specifically, you're talking about, because again, officer involved use of force represents a just infinitesimally small fraction of the cases that the grand jury is considering. So are you specifically asking about officer involved use of force grand juries, or are you thinking more broadly?
Well, actually both, primarily since we're speaking about PPB, so that would be the emphasis here. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not aware where the statistics are tracked. Obviously once they are discharged, because again, the grand jurors only are just citizens who are, for a temporary amount of time, they are, discharged and free to talk about their experiences. And I'm sure some have. There's not I'm not aware of a systemic way that it's tracked. As far as officer involved use of deadly force, those tend to receive a lot of public attention. So you could probably just go back through media accounts, and the district attorney's website contains a lot of information, although I don't think there's a centralized place maybe necessarily to look what you're looking for. But certainly the decisions in all these instances have been publicized almost universally. The transcripts have been released. And again, the legislature actually has changed the law a number of times in recent years to modify the practices of the grand jury. When I first started again, they were not recorded at all, and now they are. It didn't used to be that a charged defendant had a right to testify in the grand jury. Now they do, so there's those changes that have been made. And I think recently the change has been made, or it's going to be made, where defense counsel can be in grand jury during various portions of it. So the legislature also has oversight to some extent on how law that dictates the practices of grand jury. So and I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of the lay of the land as far as grand jury process and supervision.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, CTA Davidson. Doria, I'll turn it back over to you so we can go on to the next subject matter. Thank you all for your questions and your responses.
Yeah, thank you everyone for
Before
being here for this conversation. I think everyone learned a lot. We really appreciate your time and the opportunity to ask questions and learn more about this really important subject. So we are going to transition now into our next agenda item. So if anyone needs to drop at this time, please feel free. Okay, so PCCEP, and we are kind of running a little behind schedule. So I'm going to kind of breeze through this overview real quick. As you know, Mayor Wheeler issued his formal response to your contact survey recommendation. Members of the public can review this response on the PCCEP website. I will put that in the chat when I get a second here. But the broad strokes are that the mayor and the chief accepted your recommendation and laid out plans to move forward. And then an action item here is that PCCEP needs to decide who they want to represent PCCEP on the work group for contact surveys moving forward. Next slide. So here's some text from the recommendation. I've kind of highlighted some of the high points here. So the idea is that there will be a vendor hired to run the contact survey program, and the contract will be managed by the Community Safety Division. And in order to, draft an RFP to solicit that vendor, the mayor is proposing that a work group be formed to sort of, says here, write that overview of the program, identify who that vendor should be or what qualifications they should have, etc. Then I would like to include a representative from PCCEP, the Training Advisory Council, PBB, CSD, PPA, Portland Police Command, Officers Association, and a labor and employment attorney from the city attorney's office. So those are, again, broad strokes here. I'll pause there. Any questions, PCCEP? I know you've all had a chance to review this.
Again, I think we talked about in Leslie comment last how selection process should be working out through all these opportunities that we sit, how that should look, whether it's a vote or not. I believe that's what the statement was.
Yeah, so let's get the next slide. So yeah, Pastor Eisner is spot on. I think, Leslie, you inspired some conversation around this in the December meeting. PCCEP is super excited and grateful to get a lot of opportunities to put representatives on, panels or work groups or whatever it may be. And Leslie had kind of mentioned the need to sort of maybe formalize a process around how those representatives are selected. And so we have the opportunity to kind of put that in practice for this contact survey work group. So I think the idea for this quick discussion right now is not so much to identify who that representative is, but to come to some sort of agreement about how you would like to approach choosing that representative. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you guys now.
Again, I'm thinking again that the trusting the process of how we select and who are there is the most important harmonizing thing that we can really come up and say as a group. I'm gonna pause there. I see Leslie hand.
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in because I do think we would need to formalize a process, and I would love to talk about what that looks like that works for our group and maybe going forward, so that we can establish a good foundation for future iterations of PCEP. I did want to ask, before we get too far into that, if we know, one of the things that I think I would like to know about this specific task force is if there's like scope that you all are trying to adhere to in terms of like time and need of availability and things like that, so that that's something that whoever decides to put themselves forward can evaluate if they can participate.
Excellent question. I'm gonna pass that to Stephanie.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And it's a very flexible process at this point, I would say. I think the important, thing, we want to act quickly, but we want to make sure that it is an inclusive process and that the group that is putting together this RFP has, a meaningful opportunity to participate. So I think it's an open question of what whoever is the representative, what their needs are. So I know that's a really vague way to answer or not answer your question about what exactly the demands would be. But I think what I'm trying to at least say is that this will be a small work group, and I think it would be easy to accommodate people's schedules. I would imagine this could be, this will be drafting a document that can be kind of long. So I think there would be, some in-person meetings and then some online reviewing of documentation. But I think we can do those virtually. We could do those in person, depending on, the desires of the group. But I would say this is probably something that we could get finished within the span of 4 to 6 weeks with, a day or two a week, not full days, working maybe an hour or a meeting once a week, and then some document review. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks for that. So, and I recognize so I asked that so I wouldn't forget to ask that, but I did want to propose a potential process, just to get us kick started. I think we would, for whatever work group is being, PCEP is being asked to participate in, getting a scope of work and time commitment from whatever that work group is, I think is going to be something that we definitely want to ask Dory. And then bringing it to a PCEP meeting where people can either nominate themselves or somebody else to participate in that work group. And if there's general consensus of the person that would be participating in the work group, then, we vote on it to approve it. If there is multiple people proposing that they participate in this work group, then, a statement from each as to why they should participate in the work group, and then we vote on it. So that would be my recommendation to kick off a type of process.
Thank you, Leslie. Good suggestion. Tia, go ahead.
At first I heard that we were talking about a representative, but then I heard a work group. So I'm not sure if we're talking about a representative and a work group or both.
Sorry, Tia, I made that confusing. What the letter and the mayor was envisioning was a work group where PCEP would have a representative and the Training Advisory Council would have a representative on that work group.
Okay, thanks. So I think it's obvious that the person and group would want to be passionate and volunteer themselves or nominate themselves. And then from there, I think a vote for those people, a person would be the next step, were my two first thoughts.
Thank you, Tia. Carrie, go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, Leslie and Tia's concepts of process sounds like they'd really work for us and great. I love the idea of the scope of work. I can imagine a form similar to the way we want to formalize the process for the directives reviews, having the PCEP staff do a form and then have including what is expected externally, but also what we would in that role be expected to feed back to the committee. So the whole, and who's accountable, who's informed, who's consulted the whole model of making sure that the member who takes the responsibility on is also knowing that part of the responsibility is feeding it back to the committee and playing the role of championing it.
That's a very good point. I really appreciate that note. Yeah, no, I think so. What I'm hearing is staff can play a role in helping more clearly define or gather information about what the opportunity is, what the time expectations might be. Certainly there's going to be ambiguity around that. I'm just gonna say that right now, because a lot of the time I think these projects are sort of well, they're almost always going to be external to me as staff, right? So what I can do is help and make those requests for information, right? With the understanding that the information I'm able to convey to you might not be super clearly defined, right? But that's, we can take that step. And then kind of just essentially electing a representative in these meetings. The one thing I would suggest adding to Leslie's proposed process is the option of people volunteering or nominating themselves via email before the selection in public. Because I've noticed that sometimes some people are quicker to speak up in public meetings than others, and then if there's already a volunteer, people might be like, oh, I'm okay, or I'll step back. But sometimes those people, sometimes people always tend to step back, and sometimes they might be more comfortable stepping forward in a different format. So I think that might be a good build out there. Leslie?
To add to that, I think that's a really great point, Dory. To add to that, maybe making sure that if people nominate themselves, they're prepared to speak. And that could include like, hey, we're gonna, there might be a few people, knowing that there might be a few other people also kind of putting themselves forward. So having a prepared statement or something like that about their qualifications. So adding that to the process.
Yeah, great point. Cool. This sounds straightforward to me. Does this sound good, PCCEP? I can write this up and we can observe this moving forward.
Dory, are we talking about all appointments or just this one selection here going forward?
PCCEP, were we thinking about applying this to any opportunity that comes your way?
My recommendation would be to yes. And that way we're even going as far as like keeping track of who's on what committees, so that we know, people's capacity. Sometimes I know I'm guilty of it, overextending myself.
I just would say, hopefully that, again, content of that seat has some knowledge base of what that is. So if it's going forward, there are different things that's seated in, like the dean recommendation that we had in the past, or an interview as far as others, but I just would consider that as well as part of going, if we're looking forward.
Thank you, Pastor Weisner. We'll go over to Stephanie. She might provide some more clarity.
I wanted to just also know, I know the mayor's letter says he'd like to know by January 12th, but I understand there's more work that needs to be done here. So I talked with him in advance, and it's perfectly okay with him to allow PCCEP more time to do a vote or follow a process that they think is best. He's willing to be completely flexible on that. Was just trying to give a deadline to try and keep things moving, but I just wanted to say that.
Definitely.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Quick question, Dory, and this is to Stephanie. When would the position start officially? Do you have a timeline for that, Stephanie?
Well, no, I mean this is maybe it would be easier for me to say a little bit about what the RFP process is. So when we're talking about putting together a work group to develop an RFP, the RFP, the request for proposals, is what the city sends, posts that invites vendors to say, hey, I have this skill set, let me put together a bid that meets all of the requirements that are identified in the RFP. And this work group will decide what those requirements are in the RFP so that we can ensure that we're getting vendors that reflect what we want to see in a program, or that have the capabilities to do what we want to see in a contact survey program. So what that means, there's a form, but this work group will get to decide what those requests look like, and what those requirements will be. So it's a small group that is intended to be able to flesh that out so that when those proposals are provided, that the group that's evaluating those, and I think it could be the same group that drafts it, that might make sense to me, but the evaluation of the proposals we receive, they get scored so that we can decide who is the vendor that would be doing the technical side of these contact surveys. So that's the ultimate goal. There's not a hard timeline on this. It's going to be very much driven by the work group itself. And so, and then there are requirements for how long we leave the posting up before those proposals can come back in, and then there will be scoring and things like that afterwards. That's a little bit separate. We can talk about that down the road some, but it's the creating of this request for proposals that this work group would be focused on doing, so that the vendors who respond, we can evaluate whether they meet the criteria that the work group wants to see in the contact survey program. I hope that helps a little.
Yeah, Stephanie, thank you for that clarification. I think that helps folks a little bit more. Any other question in respect to this process that you all seem to agree on? No other questions, Dory, or comments?
Yeah, I think we are good to move forward, right, PCCEP?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So now we're technically in our end half of the meeting, so to speak. And here is that soft launch we were talking about. So back in December, we kind of had this big meeting about, what PCCEP wants to see in 2024. And one of the goals, and this has been sort of a goal of the group for a while, but something that PCCEP touched upon again in December, was wanting to build out PCCEP's engagement with the PPB directive review process. There's a lot of, certainly policy change and review going through this process, and PCCEP isn't really engaging too much with it at this point. So we kind of want to just start taking a look at what that even is, what the opportunities for public input currently are, and then maybe get into a discussion of how this subcommittee and PCCEP can maybe build, internal to PCCEP, a process for regularly engaging with this and submitting comment or recommendations or whatever it may be. All this with the caveat or addendum that we are working to schedule a formal training with the PPB policy team within the next month or so. So you may be seeing some of this information again at that time, but in like a more formal and way more from a way more professional expert person than me. But so we're kind of just dipping our toe in tonight and taking a look at this stuff. Yeah, so let's get started here. All right, first of all, what is a directive? And I just took a lot of this from the PPB website. This might be incredibly obvious to some of you, and some of you might not have really heard of a directive before. So it is pretty self-explanatory. The PPB directs member action through the establishment of policy, procedure, and rule as found within directives. Directives serve as the foundation for all Bureau operations, which is then elaborated upon by way of member training and supervision. Next slide. All right, so what is the review and revision process for directives? When a directive is identified for review or is newly created, the Bureau creates 2 timeframes. One is called first universal review and the other is second universal review, and the public can weigh in on both of those review periods. Next slide. Okay, so here's what first universal review looks like. It's usually, well, it's about 30 days long. So essentially they post the directive and it's revised text on their website, and the public can submit comments through their website essentially. At the close of that review period, they take a look at those comments and then they potentially update the draft based on the input they receive. And then that leads them into the second universal review period. So we'll go to that slide. Pretty self-explanatory again. But so then in that period, you know, you're looking at the draft of the directive that has potentially incorporated that public feedback. And then it goes through the same cycle where the public can again submit comments through their website. And again, they potentially review them, potentially make adjustments, and eventually after that period closes, are approved. There are currently some directives up for review, some that might be of interest to PCCEP. So one of them is the Procedural Justice Directive. PCCEP a couple of years back, actually this directive comes from a PCCEP recommendation. They recommended to PPB that they create this policy, and they finally did, and we have this draft of it now. And then a couple of other ones of note here: body-worn camera use, community member observation of police, and there are a couple of others on the website currently as well. That's a very, very broad strokes overview of how the process works. And these, you know, there are a bunch released like every month that are up for review or like that the public can submit comments on. So this is happening all the time. The cycle is kind of constantly going. Okay, so yeah. Tia, did you have something?
I have a question if we're ready for that. Do you want to wait?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So questions.
My question is, I get emails on when the reviews are ready for comment. And I go through and put in my public comment on my own as an individual, but as a PCCEP member. And in reading some of our emails, I wanted to know if we need to do that more as a team or if we can continue to do our individual comments.
That's a perfect question to start off with. So I think that's exactly what sort of the big picture goal is here, in my understanding, is submitting sort of comments or revisions or what have you as PCCEP as a group. There might be a certain weight to that or a certain, you know, benefit in collaborating and doing that sort of work. But of course, like you can always submit your individual comments, and this should not, doing it as a group would never preclude or exclude you from doing that as an individual. But I think the goal here is absolutely to do it as PCEP or as the subcommittee, right?
Thank you.
And so sort of the lead in here, and I think it's on the next slide, is, you know, what do you need? What will it take to sort of, you know, be able to regularly engage with the process? What does that look like to you guys? What initial thoughts do you have on the subject?
Kip, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have two thoughts on this. In that it would be great for us to have a formal process as PCEP to be able to review and submit input and feedback. But I also want to call out that the current process that exists, I don't feel is a very accessible one for a lot of people. It tends to be my experience trying to navigate it, and I'm pretty technically literate, was challenging. And I think there's two pieces that I'd like us to consider. Pardon me, I'm still getting over my cold. Is A, how do we engage from a PCEP standpoint? And B, how do we help with facilitating a better experience for the public to provide input that is more accessible and I would argue manageable. And I can get into the details of it, but I don't know that that needs to be addressed right now.
So Kip, I hear there's two processes that you would like help with. One directed to explaining to the public on how to engage. And then the second one, it's more on how can the PCEP committee develop a process to engage. Is that what I just want to make sure I understood what you said.
Yes, I think so. And as the committee, how do we engage and provide feedback? But also, how do we make sure that the process for the community to access, read, understand, and provide feedback is more a more accessible process?
Thank you for clarifying that. Perfect. Okay, we'll go on to the next person. I see Carrie and then Pastor Wisner.
Thank you. I think there's going to require more time to come up with the process outline. But this is a great conversation, and I love the fact that we're formalizing it will help us do more and more efficiently and effectively, I think. I'm wondering if there's a way when the directives come up that somebody on the committee champions it, either by rotation of people who are willing to be the champion and say, here's the deadline, here's the public comment, here's what we need to do by this date through email or whatever other format, or whether it's by expertise, I don't know. But I think it would be really helpful to have sort of a champion / project manager push the process through so that it's not so easy to get lost in the emails of all the other things we're working on.
Thank you, Carrie, for the suggestions. We'll go on to Pastor Wisner. Go ahead, Pastor.
I see Shamir put a comment in. What was that he had put there? I was trying to read that.
Samir provided some links.
Okay.
What I see here.
Okay, I thought it was.
Oh, there's another. Yeah, he did provide some other
directives.
Thank you.
One is, have anyone ever seen the directives, the books, access any of this information, what they look like? So I don't want us to get too locked in, hopefully, as a group of managing the directives, hopefully. I have one that's from 2005. That's pretty and look compared to look at the difference in each year it goes through. Familiarizing what it is that they have done through all these years that I've been part of the community of understanding how to engage. I think it's a great place where I think Dory was making recognition about training and actually being able to get us into areas through a training. I think that's a very good start in understanding the steps into how directives are come out of what it is in community input as what we have done down through the years. So that's my thought as well.
Thank you, Pastor. Any other questions or comments from committee members?
Yeah, I want to just pick up on what Carrie said. I think the designated sort of project manager, PCCEP leader, so to speak, is a really great process idea. So that's a great sort of springboard. So I just wanted to appreciate that. Yeah, and Leslie, did you want to pick up there? I feel like this is your lane.
Right. No, yeah, I think it's a great idea. I do want to touch a little bit about what Pastor Wisner mentioned, because it can balloon very quickly. So I almost think at the very beginning of the process, is it going through and thinking, is this something that PCCEP wants to comment on? Like, it could be right down PCCEP's lane. As Samir posted some additional directives, and so that's already 5. And are we going to sign all 5? Are we going to move forward on 5 different recommendations? So I think, like, even before we dive into that, does PCCEP want to comment on this, yes or no? Let's understand that. And then I also want to pick up on what Kip mentioned about making the process easier for the community to engage in, because when you read those directives, they have all of these numbers and all of these letters and all of these things that, like, if you're an average citizen, you don't have visibility or knowledge about. So I definitely don't want to miss that aspect of his recommendation. But yeah, just wanted to, again, thinking about scope and availability and bandwidth and time, making sure that we are being deliberate with what we engage in.
Yes.
Really good point. So I think bringing together some of the things that have been mentioned so far. So some sort of initial step where somehow or someone, we kind of need to figure out, like, okay, here's this month's cycle or whatever it is. What's of interest here? Is there anything? Are there a few things? So that's kind of one of the first steps. Another thing that I'm hearing is, what is the end product, right? PCCEP has a couple of options. One, and I think actually we don't maybe know the full scope of options yet, and we will learn more about that once we talk to the PPB policy director, Ashley Lancaster. I think she might have more information with us on to what extent they might be willing to collaborate with or get feedback from PCCEP. But so one option is PCCEP as a group submitting comments through the channel on the website, right? PCCEP, of course, always has the option to write a recommendation. Maybe there's something raises to the level sometimes. And there could be additional avenues that maybe we don't know the full scope of yet. So, which directives is PCCEP working on, if any? What is the desired result? That's kind of like beginning and end, I guess. And then there's like a bunch of stuff in the middle. Leslie?
Excuse me. Got excited there. For some reason, this is making me think of a decision tree so that we can make decisions quickly. It's like the first step is, do we want to engage in this? Yes, no. How do we want to engage in it? General recommendation, a meeting recommendation, community engagement, just like something like that to help us move quicker through a process. Because the other thing that I wanted to note is that these directives, we only have about 30 days to engage in them, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's how it works with the review period for the general public. That's a question I would like to ask the PPB policy team, is if there is any flexibility when it comes to working with PCCEP, and acknowledging kind of the way that group work inherently, is a little bit slower. So I don't have an answer to that officially. Yes, there's the 30-day review period and then the second 30-day review period, so 60 total.
okay. Yeah, so that was just my comment, like some sort of decision tree to get us through a process quicker, so that we can be agile. Because I know some of our processes can be clunky, so I want to make sure that we're also putting that in the forefront of like, how can we move quickly too?
Really good points, Leslie. We next have comments or questions from Odelia. Go ahead, Odelia.
Yeah, so not to make it more complicated, but with Kip's point of things being like pretty inaccessible, I think it would be good at some point down the line to be able to like relay this information in a short summary or something to the public or to like our PCCEP listserv, just to create accessibility there. That's just an idea. Yeah.
When you say this information, can you elaborate on that?
What, sorry, what information?
Like, so when you say like making it more accessible so we can like distribute it, are you talking about like the directive itself and providing a summary? Or like, yeah, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, so I think it could be just the directive itself, but also if it is something like we feel like PCCEP wants to tackle, then it can be like, these are PCCEP's thoughts, and also sharing that with the public too. I don't know. There's a lot of options.
Yeah, and Odelia, and that makes sense. And I think that's part of that decision making that you all have to make as a committee via a decision tree, as been mentioned, or some sort of process to determine which directives you all want to tackle and how many you want to tackle. And then obviously do it in a timely manner. So those are really good questions. Next we have Pastor Weisner and then Kip.
You chimed in very well to us there, because I'm going back to Leslie's statement. My thought is that there's so many things that is constantly coming out because they send it out monthly. But looking at what we do for the settlement agreement and things that have come in our recommendation scope, I would think then that's where we see those directives, like the body worn camera is one. That has been something that we've been talking about. The others are what could be in the process of like what happened in this meeting, how use of force is looked at, and how the investigation is done. In the settlement agreement, there is mental health piece that needed to be added. There are so many in the directives that are set and proposed for us as a group to look at. I would think our lane is best when we're fulfilling, not trying to see it all, but just what comes to the points of what we can use in community engagement conversations, as well as opportunity to be able to set out and do the directives itself. That's how I was my statement.
Thank you, Pastor. Go ahead. Pastor, did you have another thought? I'm sorry. I feel like I interrupted you. Oh, okay. Kip, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm looking at Samir's message, but yeah, I'll second what Pastor Wisner just said. I think there's the opportunity for us to identify the directives that are coming up for review that pertain to the work PCCEP's already doing or we feel need to be involved. And we do have these 30-day windows and 15-day staggers, if I understand it correctly. Just to clarify the accessibility part of it, just so that I'm clear about a couple things, is the directives are listed off of the Portland Police Bureau website, but each link links to a PDF. The PDF needs to be open to be able to be read, which can be a challenge technically for some folks. And then the feedback link is at the bottom of the PDF, which when you click it will open up another window that takes you to a SurveyMonkey form that has, I believe, 2 fields, one for your input and one to identify yourself if you want. And just from a usability standpoint, that's very, very messy. So to Samir's point, I think it'd be great if we look at the input directive and provide some feedback to that as well as the other things that we're looking at, because I'd really like to make that a better process for the average person who wants to be able to provide input.
I just want to quickly respond to that because I want to, I always like to try and make sure, you know, a lot of times we'll talk about something, but sometimes we'll all have slightly different ideas of what's being expressed. And then also managing expectations about what we can weigh in on, right? So with directives, when we're talking about accessibility, I think I am picking up on some feelings that the language of the directives is not that accessible. In terms of managing expectations about changes there, as far as the directives being written in a more accessible way, my only comment is that my understanding is that that is city code, right? Stephanie, or something like that, or Sarah, or anyone.
It's not city code, but it is a very formal document, and it's written for internal use, right? With the ability for the public to see and provide feedback on.
Yeah, so as far as like that becoming more accessible public language, my expectation is that it wouldn't.
No, that's not what I'm actually saying.
Yeah, and I hear you, Kip. I think what I heard was it being understood that way, and I could be wrong.
Okay.
So, but I think the role PCCEP can often play here is trying to spend the time to decipher that language and give the input from the public and kind of be that sort of vehicle. And that's a really valuable role that you all play. And then, you know, in terms of commenting on making the public input process more accessible from like a mechanical perspective, there absolutely might be something there in terms of looking at that directive itself, not to get too meta, and commenting on it. But we should be mindful of what is written versus things like how the city website works and the confines of how things, you know, how PPB and city employees are made to operate within those systems, right? So just wanted to mention those things. That's all I have.
Go ahead, Pastor Wisner.
Very, very good outline of how you shaped everything. That's how my mind was thinking. And but then Kip actually gave me a different scope when we talked about those who have not been able to navigate the system where that input is drawn for that reason. So we don't want roadblocks to get to the points of community input. And I'm not sure if we really, as like you were saying, want to ride continuously going another direction of getting into a car that's going away from what we have already been set, designed for 2024. Our directives, training and things that we are trying to do, because I really think language is important to be able to get community to understand, such as what I believe Robbie put in when he talks 850.20. And Leslie said earlier, what does that mean to the average citizens? Unfortunately, because I've been doing it so long, I can kind of walk through those, because again, the reason I showed this is because that's our homework of what we should be doing automatically if we're going to be involved in the language and understanding how directives work or what is given to the officers as far as their Bible, because this is their Bible, and how they do what they do in business. And we can always stay in policy when we have our points that we want to talk to them about, such as the Aaron Campbell shooting. The Aaron Campbell shooting was a welfare check. But how did we not follow what was written under the welfare check, and then what it was to engage after there was no public safety threat? The directives were clear on how that should have happened. So I'm with you, Dory, on that, but I'm hoping that there maybe be a recommendation or a suggestion to them about what people may need to have more easier accessibility to operate with their comments, if that's an open community engaged piece that they're asking us for. So I said a lot. I'm getting too old for this.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely to this discussion in general, and the path forward for the goals stated might be to look at, again, I know it's confusing, but the directive that governs how directives work. So there's something there, I think, maybe. Yeah. So bring this back around to, like, PCCEP and next steps here, and I think Carrie's absolutely right. We're not gonna sort this all out tonight. But I think we've identified kind of some important starting points. This might also coalesce nicely with the new leadership that will be elected for this subcommittee at the end of this month. And so that might be something to consider if you're someone who's thinking about potentially running for leadership of this subcommittee, and that being maybe a core duty, is taking some ownership of this process and helping to build it. Any final thoughts about this sort of process conversation, or anything else with directives?
I'll say something, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Tia.
In regards to Robin's books, that just gave me a little bit of anxiety seeing the books, and it's because when I write out my directive, I'm using the information I know as just a professional, empathetic person trying to give my true opinion as far as how we should be treating people with justice and fairness. I don't think that I would want to read an entire book on directives.
Thanks, Tia. And I think that's part of why Dory wants to provide a training, so that you don't get overwhelmed by the books on directives. You'll have a better understanding on the process so that you guys can make some determinations. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other thoughts or comments before we move on to the next topic? Seeing none, Dory, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect time to move to our new sort of wrap-up element here. If we could get slides. another product of our December meeting, which was so fruitful. So subcommittee next steps. So what are any action items that came out of this meeting? Do we need any volunteers for those steps, and anything else that we need some closure on? And this is our first time doing this, so yeah. Who wants-
Pastor Weisner has his hand up. Go ahead, Pastor.
What I was hoping is that from the first part of the meeting, that we would move into an area, once facts has been found out about the shooting, that we would be able to move into community engagement after what we've heard tonight of the process, but then also gather public input as a part of a bridge to be able to talk about what it may be, whatever the facts are, and then from our group, continuously being what we do, as in making recommendation from what we've heard from the public, to present a vehicle back to help their process. There was also something I had wanted to ask, and I don't know if everyone's still here on and appreciating the city as well as the Bureau taking out time just to comment. This is not the first meeting that they have had, open transparency and talking to us about the process. And I wanted to acknowledge them and thank them for when they do come to the community, when they're calling. PCCEP, they made the call also, and they came, and that's greatly appreciated. But going to my point, I was hoping also that what we're able to do is to be able to take and I use the vehicle of community engagement recommendation. I lost my thought here, so I'll come back to that other part. But the next step in that will be hopefully a form out of the facts that we hear down the line, and what we might be able to get community input and then set as recommendation. Oh, that was my point. Staying strongly in our lane as what we've identified from our meeting in December of what we are good at. And that is gathering the facts, making recommendations, and being a great support for the city to be able to come to and be able to present these type of arenas and forums, and how that these are very delicate times of what we're in, but it does work because what PCCEP is, and I can't find the document, I had meant to bring it earlier. In 2003, Derek Foxworth worked on a piece where that community and policing bridge works together in community dialogues like this, and then PCCEP was created. The last part is, I'm not sure if Jerry can answer it, or if there's someone online that can answer it. What changes since the recommendation of the settlement agreement that the Bureau has made in the use of force, and what are those things that came out of community input that made those changes happen?
That might be a very big topic that's more appropriate for a future meeting, if that's okay, as we're wrapping up here.
It is. I just wanted to have that earlier, but we moved on and I just parked it. But I wanted PCCEP to know exactly this table that we have now called PCCEP. It is just the table that the agreement brought, but there have been changes with dialogues that we've had, similar to what we're doing tonight, prior, and see how strong those recommendations came from us working together and making sure that the future of sanctity of life was preserved. That I just kind of paused that because we moved on for time's sake.
Thank you. Yeah, just repeating back, one action item that I noted that directly implicates other members of the group. So down the line, once details of the investigation for this officer involved shooting are available, making note that there is desire to maybe revisit the facts of that case and evaluate if there's anything PCCEP wants to move forward with there. So the desire to sort of revisit and evaluate from the conversation that we had earlier today, once that information is available to us. So that's a great point.
It does provide healing for the cities and people who have the emotions tonight that has not been able to express their emotional areas. And I think that's what we are here for, in areas to help community heal, as well as hear from those positions and people.
Absolutely. Okay, so Leslie, did you have a hand up?
I did, but that was kind of my question about when Pastor Wisner was thinking about having this, because it seemed like we couldn't really have information until the investigation was done. So
I think that the thinking is, once the details are available, just like note that this is something PCCEP wants to come back around on.
That is correct, Dory. Again, that is that.
Another, sorry.
Go ahead, Dory.
Action item in the chat from Tia, contact survey representative. Absolutely. So the action item there is to begin the process of potentially volunteering or nominating folks, and then would it make sense to select that person in next week's meeting, or do you think we should do that in the full committee meeting on the 24th?
My vote's full committee.
Dory, will you have the scope of work by next week, or does it make more sense by the 24th?
So there is no scope of work for this project. I can write a summary, but all I would be summarizing is the couple of sentences in the recommendation response. So there isn't a scope of work. It's just what is described in Mayor Wheeler's recommendation response to PCCEP. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, it is. I'm clear.
Yes.
And I will summarize this again via email. And maybe it's confusing because in part, the representative's job is to help create a scope of work, so to speak. Yeah. So let's say that, and since Stephanie is here, we'll have that representative for you by the 24th. If that's okay. Okay. Great. Any other action items, everybody?
And this is a question specific to PCCEP members, because this is their follow-up, their processing. And Barbara, I see your hand up. We'll reach out to you during our open public comment.
And what was the final decision on the directives, or are we waiting for the training? Yeah, so I think another sort of, next step is continued discussion, or whether emails or in the next meeting about ideas of how PCCEP's directive review process on the PCCEP end could look. And then another next step is scheduling a training with the PPB policy director, Ashley Lancaster, and that is in the works. We are just waiting to finalize that scheduling information.
And another follow-up, Dory, I'm sorry, Pastor Wisner.
No, I just said perfect.
Great. And maybe just, you mentioned a list of directives, Dory, in the slide, but then also Samir mentioned some in the chat. So maybe those are things that the members could review in the meantime, just to get themselves familiarized with some of those directives.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. I don't see any other hands up other than Barbara for open public comment. So I think we can probably move on considering.
Great. Yeah, let's open it up. Anyone from the public, if you have comments about today's agenda or anything related to PCCEP's work, please feel free to raise your hand at this time.
We'll go ahead and go to Barbara right now. Go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you. Barbara Bushinsky, Portland Cop Watch. After seeing that book that Pastor Wisner had and listening to Tia's comment, I'm concerned that, a lot of these really good directives, will be implemented, but get lost in sort of the bureaucracy and the amount of words they have to read, the officers, and the spirit of it get translated in it? Will it really make an impact in how they do their work? That's a concern that I have. Thank you.
I can initially respond to that, but there may be other people who are more suited to respond. My understanding of directives is that they are just like any of us as employees. We have a set of rules that govern how we're, required to do our jobs. And so when Commander McMillan earlier in the meeting was talking about kind of doing the policy review of like if there's been a policy violation when they do administrative discipline, my understanding is that the directives play a big role in that. So the spirit of them and the officers maybe taking the spirit to heart or that kind of thing is perhaps less important than the sort of administrative enforcement of those directives and that being kind of the point, I guess. Does that make sense? And please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong or missing anything.
No, I get it.
I think that's exactly right, Dory. I think also though, officers are trained on new directives all the time. So it isn't as though they're just given, something without any context or without the ability to ask questions or clarify. So there's a lot of additional, support that goes along with guiding how officers implement policies and directives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Next, we'll go to Dr. Elizabeth Allen.
My question is for Pastor Wisner. My question is, how many people would he guess who are here present at the meeting have his level of understanding of the directives or greater?
I hope that I've been doing it too long that nobody has to read books like I had all these years. And I'm not sure who has and who hasn't. But I do think that what Stephanie was pointing to about how important it is for officers and their training, it is the same as from my area of what I have been able to engage with officers, knowing that they know their job. Real quick question, Stephanie. I hope that answered, Doctor, for your question.
Well, no. I was looking to find out if there are half a dozen people or you're one of two.
In this group or?
Yes.
In this group.
When people talk to you, do you get the idea that they're at your level of understanding how to create and use directives?
I can't answer for everyone, Doc, on that level. I really know that my goal, as I stated earlier, as a chair and a leader that sits on this here, is to help enhance and not to make my comments where that it seems like I'm no more than anyone else. But to be able to be a part of where that I'm able to enhance, even like when I talk about what's in the settlement agreement and you're looking at directives and changes in the settlement agreement that goes toward the writing of that directive. I don't know.
And I just want to jump in and add my 2 cents that I think the culture that PCCEP as a group really successfully upholds is being a place where we don't believe that you need to have every directive memorized or even have much familiarity with what they are at all to have valuable insight on what these things are saying, because people are bringing all kinds of experience to our table, and all of those experiences have value and insight, and that's kind of what we're doing here. So, you know, having, you know, encyclopedic knowledge of directives is not really PCCEP's goal. And so I'm not sure what the intent of the question is, but I think we all appreciate the very diverse levels of knowledge and experience that we are bringing here. And I don't want to interrogate any of our members about how much they know or don't. So I just want to leave that there.
Well, it's not so much a matter of does everybody need to know it? Clearly, everybody doesn't, but really, we all bring various kinds of expertise. I don't expect people in this room to have my kind of expertise unless there's an unusual reason. So for our purposes, do you think one person or two people? How many people do we really need?
I surely don't have the answer to that question. I'm not sure anybody does.
I don't.
Thank you,
Thank for the
Dr.
question,
Allen.
Doctor. Yeah. Stephanie, I was going to ask, does the officers get training 60 days or more when the directive is written? Is that right?
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean.
Once a directive is input and officer being trained with the new directives, or what is new under the directive, they have a training that they go through before it's actually in their
Before they can be disciplined for it?
or something like that.
Is that what you mean?
I believe it is like that, or our knowledge of trying to get them to know how to do their job and following the new directive that has been laid out, such as like the body worn camera, for example.
Well, I think it depends on the directive. The body cam policy included, you know, during the pilot period, the 6-month pilot period, that for non-intentional violations of that officers would not be subject to discipline. So in other words, unless somebody is intentionally violating that policy, then they, you know, they would, it's a learning opportunity, so they would not have to, you know, they would have that learning curve. I don't know that that's true for all of the policies though. So, and Mary Claire may have a little bit more insight into how it rolls out in that way. I'm not sure if she's still here.
Okay, and that's okay. It was just, these are the things that helps me in our training when we're in the directives. More knowledge, I learned how these things are happening. And that's the interest that I would want in some of the training that I know too, expectation of what officers.
I see Sarah came up.
Yeah, I do not pretend to be the expert on policies, but I have watched enough of them be rolled out that I know there's various ways of ensuring that the members are aware of the policies and on notice that they should be following them. I mean, the body worn camera policy for the pilot, they actually had in-person training where they checked out the equipment and they learned about the policy itself. So there is kind of targeted training opportunities. Every sworn member, on up to the chief, goes through in-service training every year. Sometimes that has a healthy component of policy training in there. If there's things that have changed substantially, they have training in, they have dedicated training on the force policy when that changed, for example. There's also some policies that, the grooming standards, for example, that was a new policy. What kind of earrings can you wear and how long can your hair be? Can you have a beard? Things like that. The trainings of that sort, they do some online video training that then the officers or the members can watch, via their console when they have some time during their workday and they have a deadline to get that done. There's other trainings that when we amend the settlement agreement, it's required that everybody be aware and read the amended parts of the settlement agreement. And so that is a reading assignment that they also check off through the learning management system. So there's a variety of ways, depending on the topic and the policy that changes. There's a variety of ways of making sure that word gets out to the members.
Thank you. I didn't mean to take up that time there, Dory, but I just.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're respecting
response.
community member time and observing the hands in order. So thank you for your patience, Jake. We'll go to you now.
Oh yeah, no rush and worries. You're doing important work and I appreciate all that you're doing. One of the questions that I have, and I don't think there's an answer here, but is just about the work, the feedback that PCCEP will give on directives, and then thinking about engaging the community to provide those feedback. Having been a community member who provides feedback and has worked on folks providing feedback and speaking with others who have as well, I'm wondering if there's been any sort of information about how much of that actually goes into changes, because having paid attention to it for a couple of years, and not having a long history as many others do, oftentimes it seems like the directives come out, there's a feedback period, and then the directives that are published are very, very similar to what came out, and that the feedback that is given in my anecdotal experience, and it doesn't mean if I put in feedback, I should see that there, like from my perspective, but it doesn't seem that it comes through on the other end. It seems like we have copy A, and then what comes out after a feedback period is very, very similar, maybe a few. So I'm wondering, would there be a way to see hey, we had these directives, here was some feedback, and here's that feedback, just to be if we do all of this work, is it even going to be heard and valued? Anecdotally, it seems like it's not really heard and valued, and it's kind of a tick the box. We ask the community for feedback, but the directives are going to be the directives. And what that process is about, is there any sort of requirement or oversight to say, here's how much we're actually taking into consideration that community feedback? Is there any checks and balances to say, because I want PCCEP's work. If PCCEP's going to do a bunch of work to provide feedback on directives, is the Portland Police Bureau going to do anything with that? Is there anything that proves that they actually paid attention? Or is it just a formality that we could spend our time doing something better? I'd love to hear more about that and learn more about that process.
Thanks, Jake. Really good points.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that really quickly. That's a really, really important comment and great thing for, I think, PCCEP to keep in mind as they're engaging with this for kind of the first time as a group, and also potentially something to bear in mind. And how can PCCEP's convening power and participating this as a group, and PCCEP specifically, maybe be important to this process, and bearing in mind some of the comments that Jake just raised. So I think that's a good place to leave things, since we are a bit over time here. But a lot of really substantial and interesting discussions tonight. Great first meeting of the year, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and for staying over. And next week we have a community engagement subcommittee meeting and may pick up on some of these topics. So yeah, thank you all so much. I don't want to take up too much here with the closing comments, because it is 8:11, but really appreciate everyone's contributions tonight, especially our special guests and all of our PCCEP members. Pastor Wisner, any last comments as chair, very briefly?
You said the word briefly, and I heard that. I'm saying good night to everybody, but
All right.
I again would like to point to the fact that I appreciate the city, and this is not the first meeting that they have done openly, and we really thank everyone for coming. But most of all, I thank our people who have come to participate in this tonight and understand the level of sensitivity But if anything, keep the family on both sides in prayer, because we have a lot of work and a lot of things that we don't want to overlook with the sanctity of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, everybody, with that, it is 8:12 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Recording stopped.
Thanks, guys.